We have finished November, which means it's time for another monthly reading wrap-up. Also, I can't actually believe that we have 1 month left in 2024. Like, what the hell? I'm not sure why I always get freaked out by the passage of time, but here we are. In this video, I'm going to be telling you about the 7 books I read last month, what they're about, what I rated them, and what I liked and disliked about them. And if you're new to the channel and you haven't seen me before, hello, hi, my name is Katerina. It is lovely to see you here. I make weekly videos talking about books, and if that's something you're into, why do you consider subscribing? Alrighty, let's get into the video. I also just want to give a trigger warning ahead of all these books. I actually had surgery last month, and whilst it wasn't life-threatening, it did get me thinking of life and death, so 4 out of 7 of these books do include conversations on death and mourning and grieving. So just wanted to flag beforehand in case you wanted to skip ahead at any point. However, the first book on my list does not include any of this, so kicking off in the month of November, the very first book I read was The Satsuma Complex by Bob Mortimer. And yes, that is the well-known British comedian. So this novel follows a main character who is pretty average. He's not really happy with his life. He's just kind of floating by. And honestly, the plot of this book is so bizarre, it's kind of hard to describe what actually happens in it. But one day he gets caught up in some bad business that leads him down an unexpected path that involves a missing friend, a mix-up with the law, and a kind of wacky ending. And starting this month on a great note, I gave this book half a star. This book is proof that male comedians should be banned from writing novels because this book was absolutely awful. The weird thing is though, I like Bob Mortimer's comedy, like I've seen him on TV and I actually do find him funny, but for some reason or another, his humor just didn't translate well when it came to a fictional story. It kind of just felt like reading a ridiculous male fantasy. Like we have this guy who literally describes himself as ugly and has this really boring dead job, and he meets a very pretty girl in a pub and she's giving manic pixie dream girl, and she somehow likes him back even though he's really dull and weird and even quite a stalker at some points. And then he has this mix-up with crime and gangs that I think is supposed to be exciting, but honestly this book was so boring and silly and I was just dying to finish it. I was hopeful for like the first quarter of the book, like I felt like it probably had potential to be good, but then it really quickly dwindled and the rest of the book was just so bad. The only demographic I could see really enjoying this book is like middle-aged divorced dads. I don't know, I didn't enjoy it and I really would not recommend it. Moving on, the next book I read last month was This Country Will Bring Us No Peace by Matthieu Simard. This novel follows a grieving couple that has recently lost their child, and in order to find solace and relief, they move from the bustling city to the eerie and silent countryside. However, they soon discover that peace is not a place, but instead it's a process of confronting their sorrow and trauma. However, this quiet and desolate town leads them to more problems with its inhabitants rather than solutions through escape. And I gave this book 3 stars. I honestly really liked the premise of this book. I feel as though people in real life often have this unrealistic expectation of geographical cures. The idea of I'll just move to this city or this country and it will solve all my problems, which shock, it doesn't work like that. Your problems will just pack up and move with you. External changes don't solve deep-seated issues, and I feel like that was a very strong message that this book had. I also really enjoyed the eerie feeling that this book gave me. It was very uncanny and uncomfortable to read. The closest book I would describe this to in terms of the vibes it gave me was I Who Have Never Known Men. It explores some extremely heavy themes, but it also has this like ghostly and sinister feel to it. I also love books that explore grief in a very unconventional way, and I feel like writing about child grief is a very difficult thing to do, so I did actually enjoy this book on that angle. That being said, I didn't give this a higher rating because I felt like the execution of the plot fell quite flat, and also the dialogue between the couple just felt very inauthentic and it was quite hard to engage with them at times. I'm not saying that I know what it's like to lose a child, but I feel like I couldn't really empathize with the couple that I feel like I should have. There was also just a lot of unrealistic elements that I felt seemed to underplay the seriousness of the couple's grief, and it really caused some confusion in some parts of the story, which is a shame because I feel like the book really did have a strong premise and concept, but I feel like overall the execution itself wasn't that strong and it was quite a short book, so it didn't really have enough time to really flesh out these ideas. So yeah, I liked the book, but I didn't absolutely love it. The next book I read in the month of November was Tuesdays with Morrie by Mitch Albom. Taking a break from fiction, this is actually a memoir, and this non-fiction piece recounts real conversations had between the author and his former sociology teacher, named Morrie, who is dying from ALS, which is a fatal motor neuron disease. And the author therefore visits him every Tuesday, hence the title of the book. And Morrie shares with him valuable life lessons and wisdom to showcase the importance of human connection and loving other people fully. And I gave this book 2.5 stars. I apologize in advance for perhaps a controversial opinion because I do know that this book is highly loved and rated. I did like aspects of this book, like for example, the fact that Morrie is a real person is actually incredible because he had such courage and mental strength throughout his physical deterioration to remain so positive and calm and still talk so highly about other people and just the world. Weirdly, Morrie reminds me of that cartoon wizard from The Sword in the Stone. He's just a very kooky and optimistic old man that's a little bit wacky. I don't know if that's a niche reference or not. However, again, I liked this book, but I didn't absolutely love it. I think the writing wasn't fantastic, and for me, that let the book down. It was very just matter-of-fact statements of what Morrie said. There was no subsequent reflection from the author, so nothing really stuck with me as a reader in dissecting these lessons shared. It was purely, Morrie said this, and then he said that, and then he said this. Whereas I feel like it would have packed a bigger punch if the author was contemplating over the words that he said and was applying it to real life. And also, sorry, this is a controversial bit, but I feel like the stuff Morrie said was just sort of obvious. Like, for example, he just said things like overworking is bad, not spending time with family and friends is bad, not being authentic to your true self is bad. And I was just reading it like, yeah, obviously, this isn't new or groundbreaking news. It just felt cliche to me, and it therefore didn't really have like an impact on me after I finished the book. I actually prefer the author's other book, The 5 People You Meet in Heaven, that felt a lot more novel and striking to me. For me, it was okay. I know other people were more charmed and wowed by it, but I don't know, maybe because I've read similar books to this already, it just wasn't really that groundbreaking for me. For my next book, with the release of the Wicked film, I decided to pick up the source material, so I read Wicked by Gregory Maguire. This novel is essentially fan fiction for The Wizard of Oz, and is actually a prequel, with the majority of it happening before Dorothy's arrival. And it's essentially a villain origin story of the Wicked Witch of the West, otherwise known as Elphaba, and we delve into her past, including her complex early life, her time at Shiz University befriending Glinda, and also her eventual downfall. And along with themes of politics, morality, and identity, the novel is thick with commentary of good versus evil. And let me just also say, this book is incredibly different from the musical/film, okay? So do not expect the same story going into it. And trust me when I say I have mixed feelings, because I gave this book 3 stars. Okay, starting off with what I liked. I haven't read The Wizard of Oz, but considering that this is technically fan fiction is really impressive. It's so descriptive and immersive in terms of world building that the author really fleshes out the Oz universe. The political aspects of this book were exceptional also, like I felt like it really reflected real life politics, especially relating to corrupt tyrants running the country and vilifying the wrong people as scapegoats who don't comply with their regimes. And speaking of people, the characters also were very, very well fleshed out. Before they were very one-dimensional, but I feel like the author just brought so much life and made them so nuanced and complex that you really, really understood them. I also made a video last week on books that I think that the Wicked characters would like, so I will link that down below if you want to watch. However, there were also things about this book that I disliked. At times the story dragged, and it wasn't just due to the length of the book because this is quite chunky, but the sheer amount of numerous detailed plot lines happening at once and the subsequent dialogue that ensued from that was really, really a little bit of a headache. Especially because the writing itself is really difficult to get into. Like, this is not an easy read. It has these really long, complex sentences that are filled with many metaphors and fantasy elements. And genuinely, in the whole month of November, this took me 2 weeks to read because it was genuinely mental warfare to understand what was happening. Also, just the huge amount of morally questionable content that happens in the book is concerning. Like, this is 100 times darker than the musical. After reading it, I was genuinely baffled how someone could make a light and fun version of this into a musical, because I was literally just like, what on earth have I just read? My head honestly still hurts thoughts from reading it, so proceed with caution if you want to pick this up. Also, side note, I actually watched Wicked last night and it was phenomenal. Like, genuinely one of the best films I've seen this year. I'm literally texting all my friends being like, do you want to go to the cinema to see it? Because I really want to watch it again. Carrying on the theme of spin-off stories from original source material, the next book I read was Life and Death, Twilight Reimagined by Stephenie Meyer. This book is literally a gender-swapped retelling of Twilight. It has the exact same story, but every single character has their pronouns and genders switched. And if you have no idea what Twilight is about, firstly, where have you been? But secondly, it's essentially about a vampire and a human falling in love and the drama that ensues from all that. I feel like I need to preface the reason why I picked this book up is because earlier this month I went to go see Twilight in concert, which was so much fun, and it kind of just made me feel like a fangirl again, so I wanted to read some new Twilight material. And unfortunately, I gave this book 2 stars. And that rating is coming from someone who literally made Twilight their entire personality for years as a young teenager. I knew going into it was going to be the same story as Twilight, but I was genuinely not expecting it to be a literal copy and paste version of the other book, but with just all the genders and names switched. And I'm not gonna lie, it just kind of felt really lazy and kind of useless. Like, after I finished reading it, I was like, what was the point in publishing this? In the foreword, Stephenie Meyer said that she wrote the book to prove that, like, the dynamic between the couple still worked even if the genders were swapped. But, like, why does she need to write a book to prove the hate is wrong? Like, it kind of just feels like a money grab. I absolutely adored Midnight Sun, which is Edward's point of view in Twilight, as it was different and it gave new material and different plot points compared to the other book. But Life and Death literally just felt like reading Twilight, and it was more confusing because everyone just had different names. And whilst reading it, I was trying to like constantly match up the names, and then I ended up just picturing the like original characters rather than the characters that was going on in this book. Like, for me personally, I felt like having different genders opens up the possibility for new plot and dialogue based on alternative gender norms. But having complete lack of any original material just kind of felt disappointing and honestly quite boring, which honestly 13-year-old me would be screaming in terror to hear me say this about a Twilight book, but that's honestly how I feel. However, this was a 2-star rating, not a 0, so I did like aspects of it still. I did actually agree that the story still works with the gender swapped, it's just a different dynamic, in that we have a very confident, in-charge girl with a insecure and clumsy boy. And I guess keeping to the original story, it does challenge traditional gender norms, so fair enough. But if you're a Twilight fan, I would honestly recommend you not to read this, but instead read Midnight Sun. That's way more fun, and I think you'll enjoy that one a lot more. Again, moving away from fiction, the next book I read was another memoir, and that's The Year of Magical Thinking. This non-fiction piece was written by Joan Didion, and it delves into the year following the sudden death of her husband, alongside dealing with the critical illness of her only daughter. We dive into her own personal journey in mourning, ultimately reflecting on the sudden inevitability of death. She explores themes in grief, memory, and coping mechanisms we adopt when losing those people that are close to us. And I gave this book 3 stars. I liked how this memoir was a very raw and honest look into the disorientating nature of grief and how it impacts us, literally to the point where it challenges our perception of reality and how it literally impacts our physical and mental health. And there's a reason why her other books are so popular. She is a very talented writer. Her prose is both beautiful and heart-wrenching. Like, I think I was literally crying a few pages into reading this book. She not only explores death, but also life, and in this book she explores marriage, motherhood, and the bonds we create over time. And she's really good at putting the reader in her shoes, so you're able to empathize with everything that she's feeling. And as someone whose biggest fear is those close to me dying, I was quite rattled by this book, to say the least. However, my biggest bugbear with this book is that this amazing commentary on grief and loss stopped about a third in. And then for the rest of the book, I feel like it was just kind of like repeated descriptions of name dropping, and it was kind of like she was just showing off her wealth and fame. There was just pages and pages about her constantly traveling to Los Angeles and San Francisco, having all these dinners and meeting amazing famous people. And the name dropping honestly was just so weird. Like, she was just like, this famous celeb spoke at the funeral and this successful author wrote me a letter. Like, why did the names matter? It didn't really add anything. If anything, it pulled me out of the memoir and the emotions I was feeling, because I was just kept thinking, who is that? Why are they there? Why are they famous? Why were they in LA? Why did they go to this party? It was just kind of unnecessary scary and just a bit annoying at times. Like, I'm not American, but there were so many American references that I just didn't get. Like, there was just like names of American people and restaurants and places, but there was so much name dropping that it generally felt like I was reading a different language at one point because I couldn't engage with the story because I just didn't really know any of these references and I was getting kind of bored with it halfway. However, she did touch upon grief and mourning again at the end of the book, but I was kind of surprised overall about how little it was actually touched upon when people do describe this book in being really, really big on grief. So yeah, the good aspects in this book were genuinely exceptional, but I just felt like the middle of the book just kind of had a lot of fluff that felt kind of irrelevant to readers. And finally, the seventh and last book I read in the month of November was Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. I've been meaning to read this book all year, so I'm so finally glad I got round to it. This is a psychological thriller that follows a journalist in her early 30s, and she's sent back to her hometown to cover the murder of two young girls. However, returning to her past to visit old family and friends leads her to uncovering a few more skeletons in her cupboard. The less you know about this book going into it, the better, so I'm not going to say any more in terms of plot, but this book is really heavy in themes of the impact that toxic upbringings have and the complexities in human nature. And I gave this book 4 stars, which is the highest rating I gave this month, so woohoo, thank God we finished on a high. I wish I read more crime in general, but the main reason I don't is because I always end up guessing the ending correctly, which is annoying. But I love this book because the actual culprit of the murders were genuinely a surprise to me. And the plot in general wasn't too complex, but it was really intriguing and gripping. I also really loved how the author relied on traits of human nature to have twists in the story, rather than just random acts of violence from weird people to create suspense and shock. The characters were also really well developed. I actually really rated how it went into their past trauma and mental health because it made their motivations and reasoning behind their actions so much more believable, even if the plot was kind of unrealistic, if that makes sense. I've also heard amazing things about the TV show, which I am now very interested to watch. The main thing I disliked about this book was how the twist was delivered. I was nearing the last 10 pages of the book and I was like, why haven't we found out who it is yet? And it's because the culprit and the explanation given is literally just whacked in right at the end in a few pages in a sort of summary, which is kind of annoying. I wanted it to be like within the plot and narrative of the story. It kind of just felt like the author lost steam right at the very end and was just like, here's what happened. But overall, the book was really good. I actually really liked how dark and intense it got, which for some people it may be too intense, so trigger warning that this does touch on some really heavy topics. But I overall enjoyed it, and I'm just glad that I finished this month on a good book. And there you have it. Those are all the 7 books I read in the month of November. Overall, not a fantastic month for reading, which is annoying because my October wasn't great either. I'm really praying for a good December because I'm starting to feel myself get into a reading slump, which I really don't want to get into. But anyway, have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? And if not these, what books did you read in the month of November? Let me know in the comments below. If you like this video, please drop a like down below. It really helps my channel out and more people can see me yap about books. And if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I make monthly reading wrap-up videos every single month. Feel free to also follow me on Goodreads, where I update in real time what I'm reading. And also feel free to follow me on Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post books as soon as I finish reading them, so you can see what I've rated them out of 10 and also what they're about. Once again, thank you so much for watching and being here, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!